When people ask me what the secret is, they usually expect some complicated formula or a hidden trick, but the truth is simpler and far harsher than that. The way to do anything that matters is to think from first principles, not from tradition, not from what others say is possible, not even from what experts swear is the limit. First principles means stripping away every layer of assumption until only the raw laws of physics and reality remain, and then building upward from there. Imagine you are standing in front of a problem that everyone says is impossible. Most people walk away because they treat consensus as evidence. They think that if the majority of intelligent people say no, then it must be no. But consensus is not a law of nature. Physics is the law of nature. The cost of a battery, for example, was once thought to be unmovable because the entire auto industry assumed you could never build an electric car affordable enough for the masses. But when you break it down, a battery is a collection of materials: nickel, lithium, cobalt, aluminum, separators, and a casing. None of these things individually are impossibly expensive. The supposed barrier existed only in the way people had been assembling and sourcing them. Once you see it that way, the ceiling shatters. That is first principles thinking. It is not optimism. It is not pessimism. It is realism at its purest. The difference between analogy and first principles is the difference between copying a paper airplane because you saw someone else throw one and designing an actual aircraft that can cross an ocean. Analogy gives you incremental improvement. First principles give you leaps. The reason most people never try is because it feels uncomfortable to question inherited wisdom. It feels dangerous to ask, why? Too many times. In school, in society, we are trained to accept answers and move on. But if you want to create something that changes the world, you have to break that habit. You have to be willing to sound naive, to dig into the numbers, to question the stories everyone repeats. It is not glamorous. It is a grind. You sit there and ask, what are the absolute truths I cannot break? What is the maximum efficiency of this material? What are the minimum energy requirements? What are the unavoidable constraints of time, distance, cost? Everything else is negotiable. When you run life by first principles, you also kill excuses. You stop saying, this can't be done because it's never been done, and you start saying, this hasn't been done because people haven't looked at it the right way yet. That simple shift is the reason rockets once considered disposable are now reusable, and cars once considered boring machines are now electric, fast, and desirable. First principles force you to focus on physics, and physics is always honest. It doesn't care about politics, it doesn't care about reputation, it doesn't care about whether you are popular or not, it only cares about what works. And that is liberating, because if you play by those rules, you can go further than anyone expects. One of the exercises I often run in my head is to decompose problems like a child would. Children are not embarrassed to ask dumb questions. They look at the world directly. If you put a child in front of a rocket and say, this is too expensive to launch, the child might ask, but why can't we just make it cheaper? That question sounds dumb to an expert who has accepted the cost structure as fixed. But the child's perspective is exactly what breaks open the door. Why is it expensive? What are the parts? What are their costs? Which of those costs are truly fundamental, and which are inflated by tradition, by supply chains, by lack of imagination? Adults dismiss what kids ask as naive, but naivety is where discovery hides. So I try to keep a childlike frame when looking at industries, whether it is space, energy, transportation, or artificial intelligence. When you do this, you discover that almost every impossibility is just a long-standing convention dressed up as a law. Here's the harsh truth. Most people never run their lives by first principles. They live by analogy. They look around, see how things are usually done, and repeat them with minor adjustments. That's why progress feels slow. But the moment you start asking, what are the actual atoms and energies involved here, you realize most ceilings are artificial. If you are serious about building something, you must train yourself to deconstruct problems this way until it becomes instinct. It applies not only to engineering but to life itself. Let's say you want to improve your health. The analogy way is to copy someone else's diet or routine. The first principles way is to ask, what does the body need at the cellular level? How does energy transfer work in muscles? What does science tell us about recovery and stress? Then build your plan on that foundation. Or let's say you want to build a company. The analogy way is to copy what successful startups did last decade. The first principles way is to ask, what value is truly scarce? What problem is painfully unsolved? And what resources exist today that didn't exist 5 years ago? Then design from scratch. That's where the breakthroughs hide. I will not tell you it is easy. First principles thinking is mentally expensive. It requires patience, math, willingness to look wrong, and a tolerance for discomfort. It is much easier to mimic the crowd and call it strategy, but mimicking never gets you to Mars. It never cures climate change. It never bends the arc of history. The only way to do those things is to cut through noise, scrape away convention, and rebuild reality from the foundation upward. That is the beginning of everything else. When you take this approach, something changes in you. You stop being afraid of big problems. You start seeing them as puzzles with solutions hiding under layers of assumption. And once you see the world that way, you cannot go back. The impossible stops being a warning and starts being an invitation. That is the mindset I want you to carry into everything we discuss next. Because without first principles, all the rest is decoration. With first principles, you have a foundation that nothing can shake. And that foundation is where your journey begins. The second thing you must understand if you want to do anything meaningful is that risk is not the monster people believe it is. In fact, the biggest risk you can ever take is to play it safe. Think about it. Every major leap in history came from someone who was willing to do what others called reckless. Crossing oceans, splitting the atom, building the internet, launching rockets into space, all of it looked insane before it became inevitable. The irony is that so-called safe paths are often the most dangerous because they guarantee mediocrity. They guarantee that you will never reach the extraordinary. If you choose to only do what is familiar, you also choose to accept limits handed down to you by people who stopped asking questions long ago. Safety is an illusion. Life itself is unsafe. The ground shifts under us every day. Economies collapse, jobs vanish, industries transform. So what does playing it safe really buy you? It buys you predictability in the short term, but vulnerability in the long term. I learned this the hard way when I invested nearly everything I had into SpaceX and Tesla at the same time. Financially, it was irrational. I had enough from PayPal to live comfortably forever if I had simply played it safe. But comfort was never the goal. The goal was to push humanity forward. That required risk, not in a reckless sense, but in a calculated sense. Here is the truth about risk. It is not the absence of safety nets, it is the presence of purpose. If the purpose is strong enough, risk becomes fuel instead of fear. You start to see risk not as a cliff but as a bridge. Most people miscalculate risk because they confuse probability with consequence. They think if something is likely to fail, it must not be worth doing. But the real measure is not the probability of failure, it is the consequence of success. If the upside is big enough, if it changes the trajectory of your life or humanity itself, then even a small chance is worth betting on. Imagine standing in front of a slot machine that only pays out once in 100 tries, but if it pays, it gives you the entire future you dreamed of. Would you walk away because the odds were low, or would you pull the lever until your hand bled? That is how I see risk. When we attempted to land the first Falcon 9 booster back on Earth, experts called it absurd. They said rockets were disposable. That was the consensus for 50 years. If we failed, people would laugh, investors might walk, critics would scream, but if we succeeded, the economics of space would change forever. That upside justified every failure along the way. And fail we did, multiple times. Rockets exploded, boosters crashed, fireballs lit up the ocean. Each time we gathered data, learned, and tried again. Today, reusability is no longer a question. It is a fact. That only happened because we dared to risk. Understand this. Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is the path to success. Every failed launch, every collapsed prototype, every humiliating headline was tuition. You cannot buy that kind of knowledge in a classroom. You earn it with risk. That is why I believe the safe path is the most dangerous. If you avoid risk, you also avoid growth. You avoid failure, but you also avoid data, progress, breakthroughs. You trade the discomfort of risk for the certainty of stagnation. That is not safety. That is slow decay. Ask yourself, what is the real risk in your life? Is it chasing the dream and possibly failing, or never chasing it and guaranteeing you will regret it forever? Which one would you rather carry to your deathbed, scars from trying or regret from hiding? People often say to me, but Elon, you could afford to take risks because you had money. That is false. I risked everything, including that money, my reputation, my relationships, my mental health. Risk is relative, yes, but the principle is the same. The only real security in life is the ability to adapt, to learn, to keep moving. Money does not guarantee that. Comfort does not guarantee that. Risk is the training ground. It forces you to stretch, to sharpen, to see differently. Risk makes you alive. The world trains you to avoid it because the world values stability, predictability, control. But history belongs to those who embrace the edge. Look at the explorers who crossed seas, at the inventors who burned through countless prototypes, at the thinkers who were ridiculed before they were respected. They all lived on the edge of risk. That is where the future is built. If you want proof, look around at your own life. Every meaningful relationship, every major accomplishment, every turning point came with risk. Asking someone out, applying for a job, starting something new, moving to a new place, none of it was guaranteed, but you leapt, and because you leapt, life expanded. The same principle applies at scale. Humanity will not expand to Mars by playing it safe. We will not solve climate change by recycling a little more plastic. We will not build artificial intelligence responsibly by ignoring its challenges. Safety is stagnation disguised as wisdom, and stagnation is the slowest form of death. So how do you take risk intelligently? First, anchor it to purpose. Do not risk for thrill or ego. Risk because you are aiming at something bigger than yourself. Second, run the math. Break the problem down to first principles. Understand the physics, the probabilities, the consequences. Risk is not blind. Risk is informed. Third, commit. Half measures kill. If you are going to risk, risk fully, because hesitation is where both fear and failure multiply. People always ask me if I ever feel fear. Of course I do. Fear is part of being human, but courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is action despite fear. The first time we launched Falcon 1, my heart was in my throat. We had poured years into that moment, and it failed. Then it failed again. Then it failed a third time. Each failure felt like a personal death. The safe path would have been to quit, but quitting was the only path guaranteed to fail forever. We risked a fourth launch. That launch succeeded. And that one success carried the weight of every failure before it. That is the math of risk. One decisive moment can rewrite everything, and it will never arrive if you refuse to risk. I want you to remember this. The edge is not where you die. The edge is where you fly. The line between risk and safety is the line between history and obscurity. Playing it safe feels comfortable now, but one day you will wake up and realize you bet everything on comfort and lost the future. Do not make that mistake. The future belongs to those who risk, not recklessly, but relentlessly. Not for themselves alone, but for something greater. Risk is not the enemy. Fear of risk is. Learn to see risk as your ally, your teacher, your proving ground. If you do, you will discover that the impossible is never as far away as it looks. The third truth you must face is that failure is not the enemy. In fact, failure is the single most reliable teacher you will ever have. People grow up believing failure is shameful, that it's something to avoid, something to hide. But this belief is a trap. Failure is not a verdict. Failure is data. And data is how progress is made. Think about how children learn to walk. They fall hundreds of times. Nobody says, maybe walking isn't for you. No, they fall, they learn, they adjust, and eventually they run. That same process never stops, but somewhere along the way society convinces you to be embarrassed by it. It trains you to sit down instead of falling forward. And that is why so many people stop growing after a certain age. They confuse falling with failing permanently. But in reality, failure is feedback. Without it, you cannot calibrate. You cannot know what works. You cannot innovate. When we started SpaceX, the first 3 launches of Falcon 1 ended in disaster. Rockets exploded, burned, fell into the ocean. Critics said it proved private spaceflight was a fantasy. Investors laughed. Even my friends told me to stop. Each failure cost tens of millions of dollars, years of work, and unmeasurable stress. But each failure also taught us something. The first one showed us flaws in the fuel system. The second revealed issues with stage separation. The third uncovered weaknesses in manufacturing. Without those failures, we never would have found the path to success. They were brutal lessons, yes, but they were priceless. On the fourth launch, everything worked, and that single success outweighed every previous defeat. That is the real math of failure. You can fail 100 times, but one success can pay for all of them. Failure hurts because it feels personal. It feels like proof that you are not good enough, but that is a lie. Failure is not about you. It is about the process. It is about the system. It is about variables that need refining. When a rocket explodes, we do not call the engineers worthless. We analyze the data, We adjust the design, we try again. You should treat yourself the same way. Stop labeling yourself with the word failure. You are not a failure. You are a prototype. And prototypes are supposed to break. That's their job. The only way to get to a final design is to go through dozens of broken ones. I want you to ask yourself, how many opportunities have you lost because you were afraid to fail? How many times have you stayed quiet, stayed small, stayed safe, just to avoid embarrassment? And how many breakthroughs did you bury in the process? People think failure is dangerous. The real danger is avoiding it. Because avoiding failure is also avoiding the lessons that would have built your future. Avoiding failure is avoiding growth. It is choosing ignorance over wisdom. Every great innovator, every leader, every explorer has a long trail of failures behind them. But when people look back, they only remember the breakthroughs. That is because failure is never the final word. It is always the preface to success. When Tesla was building the first roadster, everything went wrong. Costs exploded, deadlines slipped, quality control nearly killed the company. Most people don't realize we were weeks away from bankruptcy. I had a choice: pull back, cut losses, or push forward and risk losing everything. I chose the risk. I chose to keep learning from every failed prototype, every defective part, every angry customer. And eventually those failures built the Model S, the Model 3, and a revolution in the auto industry. None of that would exist if I had treated early failures as stop signs. Here's the truth. If you want to do anything that matters, you will fail. You will fail often. And that is not a sign you are off course. It is proof that you are exactly on the right course. The path to mastery is paved with broken attempts. The only thing that can actually stop you is not failure, but quitting. Failure is temporary. Quitting is permanent. You must rewire how you see failure. Stop asking, what if I fail? Start asking, what will I learn when I fail? Do not enter with the mindset of avoiding mistakes. Enter with the mindset of collecting data. Every setback is a report card. It tells you where you stand and what to adjust. When SpaceX boosters crashed into the ocean, we didn't sit in shame. We replayed the footage, analyzed the numbers, built a stronger model. Failure gave us the blueprint to land rockets upright. That achievement, which the world once thought impossible, was built out of failure stacked on failure. So here is the mindset shift. Failure is not a wall, it is a door. But the door is heavy, and it only opens for those who push. If you quit when it resists, you stay locked out. But if you keep pushing, eventually it swings open, and behind it lies everything you dreamed of. Failure is the resistance you must meet to prove you are ready for what's on the other side. There is another angle to failure that most people miss. Failure makes you relatable. It builds trust. People admire success, but they connect with failure. When you share your scars, your setbacks, your struggles, you give others permission to keep going. You show them that success is not magic, but persistence. That's why I never hid the explosions of our rockets. I let the world see them, because I wanted people to know that failure is part of progress. And when we finally succeeded, the whole world celebrated with us because they had walked through the failures too. Failure also strips away ego. It humbles you. It reminds you that you are not invincible, that you still have more to learn. And humility is a prerequisite for growth. Without failure, success would inflate you into arrogance. With failure, success roots you in gratitude. Ask yourself this: what story do you want to tell with your life? Do you want to say, I never failed because I never tried? Or do you want to say, I failed 100 times, and that's why I succeeded? One is safe but empty. The other is risky but full of meaning. The choice is yours. Failure is not the end. It is the raw material of greatness. Every failure you face is shaping you, training you, building resilience that will carry you farther than talent alone ever could. Talent without failure is fragile. Persistence forged in failure is unstoppable. Remember this: you are not defined by how many times you fall. You are defined by how many times you rise. So if you are afraid right now, if you feel like failure has marked you, hear me clearly. You are not broken. You are being built. Every scar, every crack, every collapsed dream is data. Use it. Build with it. Refine yourself with it. Because failure is not your enemy. It is your ally, your teacher, your path to a future that safety could never deliver. If failure is your teacher, then waiting is your forge. People hate waiting. They hate the silence. They hate the feeling of nothing happening. But the truth is, Waiting is one of the most powerful phases of growth you will ever experience, because it is in waiting that your character is stretched, it is in waiting that your vision is tested, and it is in waiting that your strength either dies or multiplies. Think about it. We live in a culture of instant gratification, one-click shopping, same-day delivery, entertainment on demand. We are trained to expect everything instantly, and when results don't show up right away, most people quit. They assume the silence means failure. They confuse delay with denial. But delay is not denial. Delay is refinement. Delay is preparation. Delay is proof that what you're building is too important to be rushed. When we were developing reusable rockets at SpaceX, the timeline was brutal. Everyone expected results overnight. They said, if you can't do it quickly, it's not possible. But here's the reality. Complex systems require complex preparation. You can't rush physics. You can't cheat engineering. There were years where nothing seemed to work. Rockets kept falling into the ocean. Investors demanded speed. The press called us failures. But I knew one thing. Waiting was not wasted. Every failed landing was time data gave us. Every extra month was a deeper lesson in design. Without that waiting, without those endless years of testing, we would never have achieved the image you see today, rockets landing upright, ready to fly again. Waiting is not passive. Waiting is active. It's training in disguise. The question is not, how long will I have to wait? The question is, who am I becoming while I wait? Because waiting reveals your impatience, your fear, your insecurity. It shines a light on all the parts of you that want shortcuts, that want comfort, that want the easy way. And until you confront those parts, you are not ready for the mission ahead. Think about a seed. It does not sprout the day it is planted. It lies in the soil, unseen, unmoving, in darkness. To an outside observer, it looks dead. But under the surface, something is happening. Roots are growing. Systems are forming. The foundation is being built for a tree that will outlast storms. That is waiting. On the surface, nothing changes. But beneath, everything is shifting. And when the time is right, the tree breaks through. If you dig it up too soon, you kill it. The same is true for you. If you force your destiny to sprout before its time, you destroy it. I remember the early days of Tesla. We were laughed at. People called electric cars a gimmick. We had no factory, no supply chain, no trust from the market. Years of waiting for breakthrough battery technology. Years of waiting for acceptance from consumers. People asked me, why keep going? Nothing is happening. But something was happening. We were refining, adjusting, preparing. Every day of waiting was compounding knowledge. Every day was building resilience. And when the breakthrough came, the world thought it was sudden. But it wasn't sudden. It was years of waiting condensed into one visible leap. That's what waiting does. It disguises progress until the day it becomes undeniable. Here's the mistake most people make. They think waiting is the enemy. So they waste it. They complain, they stall, they give up. They think, if nothing is happening outside, nothing is happening inside. But waiting is never empty. It's a mirror. And if you learn to use that mirror, you'll see exactly where you need to grow. When doors don't open, ask yourself, am I still sharpening my skills, or am I wasting time? When silence surrounds you, ask, am I listening deeper to my own inner voice, or am I numbing myself with distractions? Waiting is a test. It asks, will you keep moving forward even when you see no evidence that your effort matters? Most people fail that test. They want results on their timeline. They say, if I don't see it now, it's not worth it. But the universe doesn't bend to your clock. Big missions require big patience. And patience is not weakness. Patience is strength under control. Patience is discipline in disguise. In fact, patience is the hidden currency of greatness. Look at any field, science, art, entrepreneurship. Every breakthrough is built on years of invisible labor. Nobody applauds the experiments in the basement, the drafts thrown in the trash, the nights of doubt. They only applaud the final reveal. But without the patience to endure the silence, there is no reveal. You might be in your own waiting season right now. Prayers unanswered, doors locked, efforts ignored, and it feels like nothing is happening. But I want you to reframe it. This is not abandonment. This is training. You are in the forge. Every day you hold steady, you're becoming sharper, stronger, more resilient. Just because you can't see the roots doesn't mean they're not growing. There's another angle. Waiting filters people. Those who are not serious quit early. They don't last through the silent years. Only those with real vision, only those willing to endure, make it to the breakthrough. In a way, waiting is your advantage, because it eliminates the competition. While others drop out, you keep going. And when the door finally opens, you're one of the few still standing. When I look back, some of the most painful waiting periods of my life were also the most valuable. Not because I enjoyed them, believe me, I didn't, but because they taught me patience. And patience gave me perspective. It reminded me that success is not built in one explosion of effort, it's built in steady, relentless persistence over time. So the next time you're tempted to say, nothing is happening, stop. Something is happening. You are being refined, you are being prepared, and one day the waiting will end, and you'll realize the time you thought was wasted was actually the most valuable time of your life. Waiting is not weakness, waiting is power. And if you embrace it, if you endure it, if you keep building even in silence, the day will come when the world sees the breakthrough you always knew was possible. Most people see failure as the end. They treat it like a label, a scarlet letter stamped on their forehead. But failure is not the end. Failure is data. Failure is feedback. Failure is the clearest mirror you will ever hold up to yourself. And if you have the courage to look into it, it will show you exactly what needs to change. When a rocket explodes on the launch pad, people see catastrophe. Investors panic. The media laughs. The world says, it's over. But inside SpaceX, we don't call it defeat. We call it data. Every broken piece, every second of telemetry, every scorch mark on the launch pad, it's all information. And information is priceless. If you treat failure like finality, you throw away the very map that shows you how to succeed. Failure strips away illusions. It exposes your blind spots. It forces you to see the flaws you would rather ignore. And that's uncomfortable. Nobody likes to be confronted with their weakness. Nobody enjoys looking at the mirror and admitting, this wasn't good enough. But greatness demands that honesty. You cannot build rockets on excuses. You cannot build a life on denial. The problem is most people confuse identity with outcome. They think, I failed, therefore I am a failure. That is the greatest lie. You are not your failures. You are what you choose to do with them. Failure is not identity. Failure is data, and if you use that data, you turn defeat into fuel. Think about Thomas Edison. He didn't fail 1,000 times to invent the light bulb. He discovered 1,000 ways that didn't work. Same experiment, different perspective. And that perspective is everything. The difference between those who quit and those who break through is not intelligence or talent, it's their relationship with failure. Quitters see it as an ending. Builders see it as information. When Tesla nearly went bankrupt, when we couldn't get production off the ground, when suppliers doubted us, I had every reason to quit. People told me electric cars were a fantasy. They said I was burning money, wasting time. They called me reckless. And on paper, they weren't wrong. The numbers looked terrible, but I had a choice, to accept failure as a permanent state, or to use it as feedback. We dissected every bottleneck. Every missed deadline was an opportunity to refine. Every negative headline was a reminder to push harder. The very things that nearly killed us became the fuel that kept us alive. That's how you must approach your own failures. Don't hide from them. Don't bury them. Don't label them as shame. Put them under the microscope. Ask yourself, what is this teaching me? What blind spot is this revealing? What can I do differently next time? That mindset transforms the sting of failure into the blueprint for progress. Here's a truth you need to engrave. If you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. Failure is the tax you pay for doing something meaningful. If you live a life without failure, it means you've been playing small, hugging safety, staying inside the lines. That's not living, that's waiting to die. The people who change the world are the ones who dare to risk, who are willing to fall flat, who accept failure as part of the deal. But failure doesn't just test your skills, it tests your character. It asks, can you take a hit and still stand? Can you be laughed at, doubted, mocked, and still keep building? Can you withstand the humiliation of falling short and still believe in your vision? Because that's what separates visionaries from spectators. Spectators quit when it hurts. Visionaries endure. There's a hidden gift in failure. It humbles you. Success feeds ego, but failure forces perspective. It reminds you that you're not invincible. It teaches you to listen, to adapt, to innovate. Without failure, success would crush you with arrogance. With failure, success becomes sustainable. I've lost billions on paper. I've watched rockets turn into fireballs. I've sat at desks at 3 a.m. wondering if everything I'd built was about to collapse. Those weren't fun moments, they were brutal. But they were also refining. Every time I failed, something inside me sharpened. I learned resilience, I learned persistence, I learned to value truth over comfort. And those lessons became the foundation for every breakthrough that followed. Failure is not the enemy. The real enemy is denial. The real enemy is the refusal to face the truth failure reveals. When you deny, you repeat the same mistakes. When you face it, you evolve. That's why the mirror of failure is so powerful. It shows you who you are, not the polished version you post online, but the raw, unfiltered truth. And if you can face that, you can face anything. So the next time you fail, and you will, don't collapse, don't retreat, don't label yourself broken. Stand in front of the mirror of failure and study it. Extract the data, write down the lessons, burn the excuses, and then step forward, sharper than before. Because failure isn't final, it's feedback. And feedback is the most valuable resource you will ever have. Fear is the most powerful prison in the world. Not because it has bars, not because it has guards, but because it lives inside your mind. Most people aren't stopped by the world, they're stopped by the stories in their own head. They don't need an enemy to defeat them. The whisper of fear does the job before they ever take a step. Fear is subtle. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It tells you, play it safe, don't risk it. You're not ready. You'll embarrass yourself. What if you fail? And most people listen. They shrink. They compromise. They lower their dreams until they fit neatly inside fear's cage. And then they convince themselves that it's wisdom, that it's being realistic. But it's not realism. It's surrender. Let me be brutally clear. Fear never disappears. It's not something you conquer once and for all. It's something you manage. It's something you stand up to again and again. When I started SpaceX, I was terrified. Not of rockets exploding, that part I expected. I was terrified of losing everything, of bankrupting myself, of dragging people I cared about into disaster. When Tesla was bleeding cash, when critics were circling like vultures, fear was a daily battle. I woke up with it. I went to bed with it. The difference wasn't that I had no fear. The difference was I didn't let it decide. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is acting in spite of fear. It's walking toward the fire even when every nerve in your body screams to run the other way. It's hearing the whisper of, what if you fail? And answering with, so what, I'll try again. Fear is loud at the beginning, but once you take action, it weakens. That's the paradox. The only way to shrink fear is to do the very thing fear tells you not to. You know why most people never build anything great? It's not because they lack intelligence. It's not because they lack resources. It's because they let fear stop them before they even begin. They wait for the moment they feel ready. That moment never comes. Readiness is an illusion. You only get ready by starting. The first step is always shaky, always clumsy, always full of doubt, but it's the only way forward. Think about this. The biggest risks in my life weren't the companies or the rockets or the billions on the line. The biggest risk would have been not trying. Imagine if I had said, it's too risky. It might fail. I might lose everything. Then what? There would be no Falcon 9, no reusable rockets, no Tesla Model 3, no chance of Mars. The real danger was never failure, it was regret. Living a life where I never tried. That's the cost of fear. Fear is an expert liar. It takes the shape of logic. It sounds like a good friend. Wait until conditions are better. Maybe next year. Be practical. Think of the consequences. But here's the truth. The conditions will never be perfect. Next year will come with its own risks. Being practical often means abandoning your potential. And consequences? The greatest consequence of all is wasting your life playing small. The world does not need more people living in fear. It needs more people willing to risk looking foolish, risk failing publicly, risk breaking the rules to create something new. Every breakthrough in history came from someone who ignored fear's advice. The Wright brothers ignored the experts who said flying was impossible. Steve Jobs ignored the critics who said nobody needed a personal computer. We ignored the headlines that said reusable rockets were a fantasy. Progress is built by people who hear the fear and keep moving anyway. So how do you break the chains of fear? First, you name it. You drag it out into the light. Fear grows strongest in the dark. It thrives on silence. When you say it out loud, I'm afraid of failing. I'm afraid of being judged. I'm afraid I'm not enough. you weaken its grip. You see it for what it is, a thought, not a fact. Second, you act. Fear collapses under action. Even the smallest step forward breaks its spell. Procrastination is fear's favorite fuel. Every day you delay, fear grows. Every day you move, fear shrinks. Third, you reframe. Failure isn't death. Embarrassment isn't permanent. Rejection isn't fatal. Once you change the story, fear loses its sting. There's one more thing you need to understand. Fear targets your strengths. It doesn't waste time on your weaknesses. If you're afraid of speaking, maybe your voice has power. If you're afraid of building, maybe your ideas are world-changing. Fear attacks the very place you're called to grow. That's why you must lean into it. The presence of fear is not a stop sign. It's a compass. It points you toward the place you need to go. Fear will always try to negotiate with you. It will offer safety in exchange for your dreams. But safety is an illusion. There is no safe path. Playing it safe is the biggest risk of all because it guarantees mediocrity. And mediocrity is the slowest form of death. So when fear whispers, "What if I fail?" answer, "Then I'll rise stronger." When it says, "What if they laugh?" answer, "Then I'll laugh with them and keep moving." When it says, "What if you're not ready?" answer, "I'll never be, and I'll do it anyway." That's how you break the chains. Fear is a prison built out of thoughts, but you are the key. And the moment you decide to walk forward in spite of it, the bars dissolve. There is one principle that separates those who dream from those who achieve: relentless action. The world is full of smart people with great ideas. You probably know some. Maybe you've been one yourself. Ideas are cheap, execution is everything. And execution is not a one-time push. It is a lifestyle, a daily discipline, a relentless commitment to move forward whether conditions are perfect or not. Relentless action is not glamorous. It's not the viral moment on YouTube or the press headline that makes people cheer. Relentless action is 2 a.m. in a factory, covered in grease, fixing a part because no one else can. Relentless action is staying awake for 3 nights straight, trying to figure out why a rocket keeps exploding, and refusing to stop until the answer emerges. Relentless action is facing ridicule, running out of money, and still showing up the next day to push one step further. That's what builds greatness. When people look at Tesla today, they see electric cars on highways across the world. They see success. But what they don't see are the thousands of tiny, relentless actions that made it real. I slept on the floor of the Fremont factory not because it was comfortable, but because relentless action doesn't take breaks. If the line was stuck at 3 a.m., I wanted to be there. Not as a symbol, not for a photo op, but because I had to. Because execution demands presence. You cannot outsource relentlessness. You can hire talent, you can raise capital, but no one can substitute for your willingness to act again and again when the world tells you to stop. This is the part most people misunderstand. They think success comes from massive leaps. It doesn't. It comes from relentless, almost boring, repetition. Showing up when you don't feel like it. Pushing forward when motivation is gone. Sticking to the mission when results are nowhere in sight. That's what makes the impossible possible. Action beats fear. Action beats doubt. Action beats uncertainty. Most of the questions people wrestle with vanish once you start moving. Should I? Can I? What if I fail? Action answers all of them. Start and you'll know. Start and you'll learn. Start and you'll grow. Every hesitation is just wasted time. Every action compounds. Relentless action also changes your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who wants and start seeing yourself as someone who does. And that shift changes everything. You build momentum. Momentum is power. A single step may feel small, but string thousands together and suddenly you're standing where no one else dared go. People sometimes ask me, how did you keep going when SpaceX almost died after the third rocket exploded? The answer is simple. Relentless action. There was no choice to stop. The company was days away from death. But instead of collapsing, we poured ourselves into building the fourth rocket. We dissected everything, rebuilt, improved, and launched again. That fourth flight succeeded. And because of that one success, NASA signed a contract, investors regained trust, and the company survived. Relentless action saved SpaceX. Ask yourself right now, where have you stopped acting? Where have you convinced yourself that waiting is wiser, that pausing is necessary, that conditions must align before you move? That's the chain you must break. Relentless action doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't wait for motivation. It doesn't wait for guarantees. It moves now. And let's be clear, relentless does not mean reckless. It doesn't mean running blindly into chaos. It means refusing to quit. It means adapting, learning, adjusting, but never stopping. Failure is part of the process. Action doesn't avoid failure. It uses it. Every failure is just feedback. Every setback is just data. That mindset makes you unstoppable. There's a dangerous lie out there that says, slow down, life is short, enjoy it. Don't push so hard. But understand this, you are not here to waste your potential on comfort. You are not here to die with your dreams still locked inside you. Life is short, yes, and that's exactly why relentless action matters. Because every day you wait, every day you postpone, is a day you never get back. Relentless action means discipline. It means putting the mission above mood. It means waking up when you're tired, working when you're uninspired, showing up when it's inconvenient. It's what builds trust with your team, with yourself, with the world. People don't follow words, they follow action. And when your actions are relentless, they speak louder than anything you could ever say. Here's the truth. The universe rewards momentum. Doors open for those who move. Resources flow to those who take initiative. Opportunities reveal themselves only after you've started walking. Waiting for clarity before you act is backwards. Clarity comes from action. Always. Relentless action is also contagious. When your team sees you pushing, they push. When they see you sacrificing, they sacrifice. When they see you refusing to quit, they refuse to quit. Leadership is not about orders, it's about example. And the most powerful example is relentless action in the face of obstacles. Let me give you a harsh reality check. There will always be reasons to stop. Fatigue, criticism, financial strain, doubt, they will stack up until you feel crushed. But if you give in, you'll join the millions who had potential but never acted long enough to see it fulfilled. And if you keep going, if you act relentlessly, even when everything says stop, you'll join the few who change the world. Remember this, relentless action is the bridge between vision and reality. Without it, your dream remains fantasy. With it, even the most impossible dream begins to take shape. So I ask you, what's the one action you've been avoiding? What's the step fear has convinced you to postpone? Take it today, not tomorrow, today. And once you take it, take another, and another. And don't stop, because in the end, greatness isn't built in a single moment. It's built in thousands of relentless ones. Most people treat failure as a tombstone, a mark of the end. They see failure as the proof that they were wrong, that they should stop, that they weren't good enough. But let me tell you something I've lived through over and over again. Failure is not the end. Failure is the fuel. It's the raw material you need to build greatness. Without it, you have nothing but theory. With it, you have data, direction, and fire. When SpaceX's first 3 rockets exploded, I lost nearly everything. Investors pulled out. The press laughed. Headlines declared the company dead. Friends told me to stop. And truthfully, there were nights when I thought maybe they were right. But I realized something powerful in those moments. Failure was not the verdict. Failure was the test. It was the harshest teacher, but also the most honest one. Those explosions gave us the information we needed to design a rocket that could actually fly. If we hadn't failed, we never would have learned. Failure is feedback. It tells you where your system is weak, where your thinking is flawed, where your preparation is incomplete. It strips away illusions and forces you to confront reality. And reality is what you need to win. People who avoid failure are not playing to win, they are playing not to lose. And that mindset guarantees mediocrity. Think about this. A rocket that never leaves the ground, never explodes. But it also never reaches orbit. You can live your entire life without failing, but it means you never tried to lift off. Is that what you want? A safe, failure-free life, grounded forever? Or do you want to test your limits, risk explosions, and actually see how far you can go? Failure also builds resilience. Every time you fall and get back up, you wire your brain to be tougher. Every scar is proof that you survived, that you learned, that you refused to quit. Resilience isn't built in comfort, it's built in chaos. It's built when your plans collapse, your confidence shatters, and you choose to try again anyway. That choice transforms you. Tesla went through hell many times. There were quarters when we were weeks away from bankruptcy. Suppliers didn't trust us. Customers doubted us. The media mocked us. But every failure, whether it was a flawed design, A broken supply chain or a missed deadline forced us to improve, forced us to innovate, forced us to cut fat and focus only on what truly mattered. Failure refined us. Without it, Tesla wouldn't exist today. You have to stop seeing failure as punishment. It is training. When a rocket fails, we don't say, the universe hates us. We say, great, now we know what doesn't work. Every failure is a data point. The faster you collect data, the faster you evolve. That's why speed matters. Don't wait years to test. Don't wait for perfection. Launch, fail, learn, repeat. That cycle is how you leap ahead, while others are still polishing their ideas. The people who change the world are not those who avoid failure. They're the ones who collect failures faster, process them better, and turn them into breakthroughs. Think about Thomas Edison. Thousands of failed attempts before the light bulb worked. Think about SpaceX years of explosions before Falcon 9 became reliable. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is the pathway to it. And here's something deeper. Failure humbles you. It burns away arrogance. It reminds you that you don't have all the answers. That's a gift. Because arrogance blinds you to reality. Failure forces you to see clearly. It makes you listen, adapt, change. Without that humility, you stagnate. With it, you grow. The danger isn't failure. The danger is stopping after failure. The only way failure wins is if you quit. As long as you keep moving, keep learning, keep adjusting, failure becomes your ally. Every time SpaceX blew up a rocket, the world thought it was over. But every time we said, okay, let's fix what went wrong and try again, that cycle turned failure into the very foundation of our success. Now let me be blunt. Most people waste their failures. They hide them, they deny them, they wallow in them. That's a mistake. You have to dissect your failures like a scientist. Don't just feel them, study them. Ask why. Break them down piece by piece until they give up their secrets. Because inside every failure is the seed of your next breakthrough. Failure also builds credibility. Think about it. Who do you trust more? Someone who has never failed, or someone who has failed, survived, and kept going? The first might look shiny, but they're untested. The second is proven. They've walked through fire and are still standing. That's strength you can rely on. I'll tell you something personal. After the third SpaceX failure, I was down to my last money. I had enough to fund one more launch. If it failed, everything was gone. But I didn't stop. We built Falcon 1, launched it, and it succeeded. That success only happened because of the failures before it. They taught us what not to do, and that made the final success possible. Failure built the bridge to survival. So here's what I want you to engrave into your mind. Failure is not fatal. Quitting is. Failure is not weakness. Avoiding it is. Failure is not the enemy. Fear of failure is. Once you remove that fear, you become unstoppable. Because then you're free to test, to explore, to stretch beyond limits, knowing that even if you fall, you rise stronger. And here's the paradox. The more you fail, the more respect you earn. People may mock you in the moment, but when you persist, when you finally break through, they admire you 10 times more because you stood where others would have collapsed. So stop waiting for the perfect plan. Stop obsessing over avoiding mistakes. Take action. Fail fast. Fail forward. Use every failure as fuel. Because in the end, success is not built on avoiding failure. Success is built on mountains of failure turned into stepping stones.